My name is Rob Bradley. I'm Director of the International Climate Policy Initiative at the World Resources Institute. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I would like to make 3 points, each of which I treat in more detail in my written testimony, which I hope can be included in the record. First, success against climate change will mean both strong federal policy in the United States and action from major developed and developing economies. Second, the world has changed dramatically from the days of the Kyoto Protocol. Major developing countries are ready to take significant action on limiting emissions. Third, the Bali Action Plan provides a solid foundation for a new international agreement that meets key US interests. The United States is an indispensable leader in the fight against climate change. Without the world's largest economy and biggest historical emitter, other countries cannot fix the problem. But nor can the US do it alone. Almost 80% of global emissions are produced by 15 countries, counting the EU as one country, 9 of which are in the developing world. The Kyoto Protocol, the main climate agreement to date, has been rejected by the US in particular because of the concern that without meaningful participation from major developing countries, it would be ineffective and excessively costly to the US economy. Developing countries have historically argued that with their poverty and small historical contribution to the climate problem, they should not be responsible for curbing emissions. But in recent years, there has been a flood of developing country climate plans. For example, Brazil announced that it would reduce its deforestation rate over 50% from recent levels by 2017, avoiding an estimated 4.8 billion tons of CO2 emissions. China committed to reducing national energy intensity, that's energy use per unit of GDP, by 20% by 2010 and looks on course to meet that goal, with programs expected to cut emissions by 550 million tons of CO2. Investment in wind, hydro, nuclear and biomass are expected to save an additional 640 million tons by 2010. India has a number of states that are taking forward aggressive renewable energy targets with renewable portfolio standards. Mexico aims to halve its greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and is considering employing a cap-and-trade policy akin to the one recently considered by US Congress. South Africa has presented a detailed and highly ambitious plan to peak its national emissions by 2020 and to bring them down to low levels in 2050 in accordance with the science. These policies will often not be of the same form as the cap-and-trade approach favored in the US and Europe, but that need not make them any less ambitious. They are the more impressive when we consider the poverty of many of these countries. As has already been mentioned, in India, 550 million people still lack any access to electricity, and they, just like Americans and Europeans in the last century, legitimately aspire to get it. But they are seeking to do so on a lower carbon pathway. Indeed, countries such as China and India see their future as leaders in the clean energy revolution. Significant questions do remain. Many of these countries have a poor record of implementing national plans. Reliable data are hard to obtain. Standards of enforcement, governance and transparency are very variable. It will certainly not be enough for countries to take each other's plans at face value. And this is where the international agreement comes in. It must enhance collective willingness to act by establishing accountability, to build trust that countries are taking real action to cut emissions and framing those actions in the context of global goals. The Bali Action Plan provides for a radically different agreement from the Kyoto Protocol. Mitigation actions from both developed and developing countries are to be, quote, measurable, reportable and verifiable, end quote. This language also applies to finance, technology and capacity building support to developing countries. This body can shape the success of the international process. Most importantly, adopting an ambitious federal climate policy will unleash action not only in the US, but also from countries that have been waiting on the world's biggest economy. Second, US policy should include provisions for financing international action on adaptation, forest protection, and clean technologies. I don't want to imply that this will be easy. Many countries remain wary of commitments, and their rhetoric will stress these fears. But the world has moved on a lot in 10 years. There is a real willingness to tackle emissions and a potential agreement that can turn this willingness into verifiable action. For the United States and for the world, the time is right to rise to this challenge. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.